Okay, good evening, everyone. This is our first session for the year for Apatow's Academic Forum. Before we start, Dr. Anas would like to say a few words on behalf of Dr. Jihad. Dr. Anas?
Thank you, Dina. Thank you for your introduction. Good evening, everyone, our distinguished colleagues. On behalf of Professor Jihad Hamdan, our president, the president of Apatow and editor-in-chief of iJazz, I warmly welcome everyone. Unfortunately, Professor Jihad will not be with us today. He is not feeling well. So we are honored today to have you in such important talk with our distinguished friend, Professor Tahrir Hamdi, the president of Arab Open University. Just I want to let you know that some of our good news of Apatow, as we celebrate this week with a significant milestone of our journal, iJazz. According to the latest Scopus performance report that was released in May 26, the journal has demonstrated a remarkable and sustained progress, securing a leading global position and firmly maintaining its place among the prestigious Q1 journals. We are also pleased to announce to you that tomorrow we will release a new issue featuring about 28 research articles covering a wide range of topics in literature, translation, and in linguistics. So congratulations for every member of Apatow for your contribution, for your support, for this and to this outstanding achievement.
Bravo.
Alhamdulillah. So your dedication and commitment have played an important role in this continued success story. Maybe Dua was a huge part of this success for many years. We want to thank her for this. Special thank for her, and thank you for everyone.
Thank you.
Yes, and I hand over to Dina, who will proceed with this session. So enjoy the talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and Alf Mubarak. Congrats, big
Allah
congrats.
Yabarak.
MashaAllah. Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you very much.
congratulations. Wallah,
Shukran.
great news.
Dr. Asma, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Dina. And good evening, colleagues and friends. Most of you are friends here. And welcome to today's webinar. I'm Asma Hussein, and I have the privilege of chairing today's session, which centers on Professor Tahrir Hamdi's award-winning book, Imagining Palestine, Cultures of Exile and National Identity. طبعا the sticky note shows how many times I have been through the book. The book won the Palestine Book Awards. And our session will take a distinctive form rather than a conventional paper presentation, which will be there, of course. I will be working through an extended interview that I conducted with Dr. Tahrir, and it will, fortunately enough and coincidentally, will appear in the upcoming issue of iJazz that Dr. Anas has just announced. The interview titled Reading Tahrir Hamdi's Imagining Palestine into Al-Aqsa Flood. So the title tells it all. And the interview undertakes a retrospective as well as a prospective interrogation of the book's central ideas and theses in light of the seismic reverberations of the 7th of October 2023. Dr. Tahrir's titular formulation, Imagining Palestine, synthesizes and enters into a conversation, to be accurate, with Benedict Anderson's Imagined Communities, as well as some enters into a conversation with Marian Hirsch's Post-Memory. And she will elaborate more on that because that was one of the points that appeared in the interview's introduction. So she is synthesizing these concepts to argue that Palestinian national identity is continuously reconstituted across the exilic, diasporic, and occupied geographies of that Palestinians inhabit. And in her argument, as I understand it in the book, is imagining and realizing an actual Palestine are interactive and inseparable. So, in her words, she calls it an anticipatory endeavor. So, having read the book, having the privilege indeed of reading the book both before and after October the 7th, um, I can attest that the references Dr. Tahrir made to Rifat al-Ar'ir, to the UNRWA, the return right nexus, and the instrumentalization of anti-Semitism, as well as the symbolic stakes of the Eurovision music contest, now resonate with almost prophetic currency and accuracy, given the situation now after the Gaza war. Perhaps I can just briefly introduce Professor Tahrir Hamdi, because I believe that you all know her. But just for those who need the introduction, Professor Tahrir Hamdi is president of the Arab Open University in Jordan. Her scholarly work spans post-colonial studies, Palestinian resistance literature, as well as cultural theory. She is, in the fullest Sa'idian sense, an oppositional intellectual. And as the interview makes it clear, the designation of being an oppositional intellectual is not merely an academic designation for her. It is existential, as I understand after conducting the interview with her. Now, I will start with walking us through the major thematic axis of the interview before opening the floor to Dr. Tahrir's response and contribution and talk indeed, because in her talk she will expand on some of the points that were addressed in the interview, and sometimes she will revisit some of the points that were raised in the interview. So to make it easier for the audience to follow what she is revisiting, I thought that this outline might be helpful for everybody in the audience. So the interview traverses 5 interconnected axes that I will sketch briefly, trusting that Dr. Tahrir will deepen any thread in her response. First, we discussed the metaphorics of marginality, namely concentrating on the book's final chapter, which is chapter 4, titled Writings on the Wall. Because this chapter brings together Naji Ali, cartoonist Naji Ali, biochemist Hamdi Khalil Hamdi, and Mahfouda Shtaya with embracing her olive oil tree, and as well as the expressive traditions of Dabke and Thob. So this seems like a weird mixture, but Dr. Tahrir's unifying argument is that a wall in her chapter's title, Writing on the Wall, is not literal wall, but it is metaphoric, and it indexes the only expressive venue available to those on the margins: refugee camps, makeshift laboratories, exile within exile, etc., etc. So it is not a literal wall. So Palestinian cultural production in Dr. Tahrir's account is not merely documented from marginality, it is constituted by it. So this is the first axis. The second axis concerns the oppositional intellectual. And Dr. Tahrir insists in the Gramscian as well as the Sa'idian sense that every revolution requires its intellectuals, and not the ivory tower experts, but the thinkers who stand with the oppressed and articulate the counter discourse. And now, there was a productive tension, I will call it, that emerges in the interview around accessibility, because I somehow pressed Dr. Tahrir on whether figures like Darwish and Kanafani remain inaccessible to the grassroots and that they claim to serve. And the question of who mediates between the oppositional thought and the popular consciousness remained, I would suggest, in the interview unresolved. Hopefully, perhaps it will be resolved today. And the third axis concerns Armed Struggle and the Fanonian Dialectic. Dr. Tahrir offers a categorical critique of the Oslo Accords as worse than surrendering. And she recuperates Fanon's theorization on decolonial violence as the passage from dehumanization to rehumanization. Simultaneously, she argues in the interview that awareness is more important than the gun, and these are her words. So, the fighter, in her argument, stays near Palestine, and the resistant and the fighter. But she believes that the intellectual is the one who keeps Palestine close to the hearts and minds of people. So everyone has their function. So the tension between these, the fanonial violence and the raising awareness, is one of the interview's most generative threads, indeed. Fourth, we talked about theorization and the performativity of art, and drawing basically on Ellen Papet's distinction between grounded theorization and over theorization. Dr. Tahrir concedes that art alone does not get people out on the streets. Events do, in her argument, but again she insists, citing Edward Said, that if you don't write the story down, it will simply disappear. So the archive, in her proposition, is the infrastructure of collective memory and, by extension, of resistance. And this is at least my understanding of her arguments. The last axis of a thematic axis of the interview concerns her prospective vision. And Dr. Tahrir closes with an unequivocal assertion, saying that a Palestine from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea is just a breath away, in her words. And she is kind of dead sure of the dismantlement of the Zionist project and the inevitability of return. And and she closes the interview with these words, quote, "Revolution is on the way, liberation is coming, and the return, it is just a breath away." With these concluding words, I would now leave the floor to Dr. Dr. Tahrir to expand on these points and perhaps revisit some of these arguments. تفضلي دكتور, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Asma. You very beautifully introduced and commented on all the ideas and theorizations, etc. Also, I want to congratulate Apatow and IJAS and everybody who made, this kind of success possible. So thank you for everything, and thank you for inviting me. And I think in my presentation, it does deal with a lot of the points that Dr. Asma mentioned. So let me see now to share my presentation. Loading, no, unable to share right now. Wait a minute, let me see what's happening again. Let me go down to share. And it is where? Okay, let me do it again. Let me open up the presentation. Here it is. Okay. All right. And I go back here and share. Okay.
It's not working.
No, it will be working now.
Oh, there you go. Oh, great.
Right. You can see it, right?
Yes, we can.
Okay, and I want to get this out of the way. Where is it? Slideshow. Because I want to go from the beginning, but this is not getting out of the way, so I can, there, slideshow. Why doesn't it say from the beginning? Again, slideshow, okay, from the beginning. All right, so my presentation today is called Imagining Palestine, and I'm using three words resistance, liberation, and return. Because basically, this is really what I'm arguing in my presentation. Now, a lot of the ideas in the book are in my presentation, but I feel because the book was published in late 2022, early 2023, this was before the Gaza genocide. So I think that before we dive into the imagining as resistance concept, we need to talk about the opposite of that. For example, the U.S. foreign policy, you hear Trump saying things like the policy of peace through strength, which in my words is the right to what? Annihilate. The logic of peace through strength turns genocide into policy and dehumanization into common sense. And just for everybody's information, the tonnage of bombs dropped on Gaza is more than 6 times the bomb tonnage dropped on Japan in 1945. That is in Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined. The bombs dropped on Gaza are over 85,000 tons. I just want to, I want you to think about that kind of destruction and annihilation. So I say this, what happens? What happens after genocide? Carefully engineered famine, carefully engineered widespread disease, the total destruction of a city's infrastructure, the bombing of hospitals, supermarkets, bakeries, the mass killing of children, women, and men, the specific targeting of schools and universities, scientists, intellectuals, and journalists. This is what we call scholasticide, the destruction of education, epistemicide, the destruction of knowledge, domicide, the destruction of homes and home life, herbicide, the destruction of cities. Ghassan Abu Sittah says the following: part of our resistance to the finality of genocide is for us to talk about tomorrow, plan for tomorrow, work on healing the wounds of our people. The aim of this war or this genocide is that there would be no Palestinian tomorrow. And he goes on to say, we own tomorrow. Tomorrow is a Palestinian day. Basically, this is what my book, Imagining Palestine, is about. As Dr. Asma mentioned, it's an anticipatory discourse or endeavor. It's about the future. It's about resistance. It's about sumud and liberation. The answer to genocide is resistance, sumud, and liberation. That is the power to imagine. To imagine what? The opposite of the Zionist death machine and the destruction it has wreaked. And we can sort of understand what happened in October 7 in terms of the argumentation by Frantz Fanon in a book he published in the 1960s called The Wretched of the Earth. In it, Fanon states, this is from chapter 1 of The Wretched of the Earth, which was published, I believe, in 1967. I hope I'm not wrong, but it's around that time. He says, the violence which has ruled over the ordering of the colonial world, that violence that the colonial world uses is taken over by the colonized. And this is what Dr. Asma mentioned when she said, Fanon talks about how the colonizer dehumanizes the colonized. Therefore, the colonized must rehumanize by re-empowering, taking over that power. So look what Fanon says here. That same violence will be claimed and taken over by the native at the moment when deciding to embody history in his own person, the colonized does what? He surges into the forbidden quarters. That is the place that where the colonizer resides. A professor in the United States, professor of politics, her name is Jody Dean. She's from New York City. She said, and she was dismissed for a while, but then she was brought back. So what did Jody Dean say about, the context was, I think, yeah, October 7th. She says, here were moments of freedom that defeated Zionist expectations of submission to occupation and siege. Who could not feel energized seeing oppressed people bulldozing the fences and closing them, taking to the skies an escape, and flying freely through the air? In other words, imagining Palestine also is about what Edward Said calls creating beginnings. In his book, by the way, his book, Beginnings, Intention and Method, was published in the year 1975, even before Orientalism. Edward Said speaks about creating beginnings which are intentional. That is, you intend to act, you have agency, you have power, you meaning the colonized, and bestow power and agency upon the individual or group. Whereas origins are given, beginnings are made. Beginnings are made, invented, and imagined. Creating beginnings is an empowering act. On the idea of imagination, Murid Barghouthi, the Palestinian poet, said in his book, I was born there, I was born here. He asks, and this is at the very beginning of his memoir, he says, but I tell myself, no reality on the ground cancels out imagination. Reality waylays us quickly, but gives rise in the mind to further imagining. He says, I come close to asking myself if there is a truth outside the human imagination. So the human imagination is empowering. Imagining is at its core, I argue, an act of resistance and defiance against the Zionist imperialist forces of erasure. It is a conscious process of construction. I also tie imagining to hope, imagining the outlines of a better world. This is Patrick Williams, a British critic. Also involves creating a hopeful discourse of liberation, a discourse of resistance. What is imagining? It is a discourse of resistance against what? Against not only the Zionists, not only the Zionist and imperialist enemy, but it is also a resistance against defeatism, الانهزام والانهزامية, and surrender. It is against defeatism and surrender, despite the seeming hopelessness of the present situation of genocide, etc. And the martyr, of course, you've all heard of the martyr and professor from the Islamic University of Gaza, Rifat al-Arir, whom I interviewed in my book, Imagining Palestine, before he was ever martyred. And of course, you are familiar with his poem, his beautiful, powerful poem, If I Must Die, You Must Live. It's about continuation. And he says, let my death bring hope. Rifat al-Arir, an academic, a poet, and a martyr. Of course, the Zionist enemy always targets the academics, the intellectuals, those people who can think, who can influence the new generation. So we know that the Zionist enemy is perpetrating a genocide, but at the same time, they target certain people, the intellectuals, like Rifat al-Arir, and before him, people like Naji Ali, Ghassan Kanafani. So Rifat al-Arir becomes now an idea, and he lives on through his words. And I'm pretty sure you are familiar with his poem, If I Must Die, You Must Live, to tell my story, to sell my things. And I'm telling his story as he wanted. If I must die, let it bring hope, let it be a tale. So it's a resistance against what, again, I emphasize, It's a resistance against defeatism. Palestinians must resist the very concept of defeat and defeatism and surrender. It is a politics of refusal. It's a politics of action and defiance. This is a cartoon from the popular Palestinian artist Najil Ali. And as you can see in this cartoon, Handala awaits his return. There's Handala with his back to us, to the audience. Why? Because he is upset with the world that has betrayed Palestine. He will not turn his face and face us until he can return. And as the shirt on the man's the words on the man's shirt say لا صلح لا مفاوضات لا اعتراف لاجئين 1948, and the words on the shirt are Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon, in Syria, in Jordan. So he is talking about the return of all the refugees from all the refugee camps and those in exile. So Handala awaits his return. Exile for Edward Said is both physical and metaphorical. For Edward Said, it was both. But the intellectual who will always stand with the oppressed, this exile is also mental. Kanafani, Ghassan Kanafani, who was martyred in the 1970s, spoke about resistance literature. He was the first. Ghassan Kanafani was the first to use the words resistance literature. And he says that resistance literature is born under siege. He talked about this new kind of poetry and literature, adab al-muqawamah. And as Barbara Harlow said again in her book 1987, that was published in 1987, that Kanafani was the first to use the term resistance literature. And this resistance literature, Kanafani says, is not characterized by a note of lamentation or despair, but reflects what? An admirable hope and a constant revolutionary fervor. Very important concept here of resistance literature by Kanafani. It's a combative literature of resistance. In Arabic, Kanafani calls it, and the writer of this combative literature is a combatant writer or a fighting writer. Al-Adib al-Muqatil. Al-Adib al-Muqatil, or the combatant writer. And this is very similar to Frantz Fanon's ideas of a fighting literature. Note that they even use the same words, the same concepts. Now, Theodor Adorno is a philosopher, a European philosopher, who says, when we have a consummate negativity like the colonizer, the Zionist entity, it represents a consummate negativity. So Adorno said, what do you have as opposed to that? This consummate negativity delineates the mirror image of its opposite. What is the mirror image of the opposite of negativity? A fierce defiance, a fierce resistance. So the intellectual, as Dr. Asma said, the oppositional intellectual is always restless, is always living metaphorically on the margins of society with the oppressed. It is the margin is a space of resistance and radical openness. Bell Hooks is an African-American theorist. She talks about the intellectual not only living on the margin, but choosing the margin. She says the following: this is an intervention, a message from that space in the margin that is a site of creativity and power. That inclusive space where we recover ourselves, where we move in solidarity to erase the category colonized, colonizer. Marginality as a site of resistance. Enter that space. Let us meet there in the margin. Enter that space. We greet you as liberators. Mahmoud Darwish's tribute to Edward Said in Counterpoint after Edward Said died in, I think, 2001 maybe, or yeah, sometime around 2001, 2002. Mahmoud Darwish says in Counterpoint, Tibaq, I belong to the question of the victim. Were I not from there, I would have trained my heart to nurture their deer of metaphor. So carry your homeland wherever you go and be a narcissist if need be. The outside world is exile. Exile is the world inside. And what are you between the two? In his poem, Earth Presses Against Us, which he wrote after the Sabra and Shatila massacres in Beirut, if you remember that, if you're old enough. Darwish wrote at the end of that poem, Earth Presses Against Us, we write our names in crimson mist. Crimson is red, blood. We end the hymn with our flesh. Here we will die. Here in the final passage. Here or there, our blood will plant olive trees. So the idea of a defiant hope. And in his poem, A State of Siege, Halat Hisar, he begins the poem by saying, we nurture hope. We do what prisoners do. We do what the unemployed do. We nurture hope. In that same poem, he says, the lesson of the martyr. This is what the martyr teaches us. He says, the martyr teaches me no aesthetic outside my freedom, no art, no literature outside my freedom. So any form of literature must be tied to the reality, the oppressive reality. Now, when I was in London 2 weeks ago, they invited me to talk about this concept, endurance. But this is how they defined it. And I had a problem with this definition. They say the following. Endurance is a concept held hostage by its futures. We endure to reach some distant horizon, a different condition, a dream, or some form of release. But what would it mean? And this is the problem I have with their definition. But what would it mean to consider endurance as its own condition of being, as a quality that shapes social and political worlds? In other words, you must simply endure suffering for the sake of enduring. So why can't, my question is, why can't endurance be connected to a hopeful future? We endure, but at the same time, we resist. In their article titled, When Resilience Becomes a Burden, Reflections from Gazan Palestinian Scholars, that is Dader, Shweikh, Shoman, and Hamdan, they argue that seeing Gazans as resilient obscures the toll of genocidal settler colonial violence. So we must not overlook the situation that they're living in, but at the same time, they emphasize the idea of resistance. The West Bank scholar Rita Jacaman from, I think, Birzeit University, she says, we must emphasize the continuation of the struggle, continue to struggle for justice, freedom, sovereignty, self-determination. She's against the idea of international NGOs that come to the West Bank and they simply parachute the idea of resilience or endurance without tying it to politics or history. She says, resilience is parachuted down and imposed on Palestinians and is divorced from justice. So it is depoliticized, dehistoricized. So she deconstructs the NGO, the international NGO concept of resilience because they want us, as she says, to suffer in silence. So if you bring all their ideas together, we can listen to the Palestinian voices from the inside, min al-dakhil. This endurance should never be interpreted or theorized as something that is apolitical, an apolitical form of resilience, because sumud, endurance, is collective. It is community-based Palestinian resistance, and sumud. It is the antithesis, the opposite of surrender and defeatism. Okay, so I think I made it clear about the difference between sumud and resilience. We have different examples of sumud. In Palestinian prisons, for example, when men smuggle their sperm to their wives, and we have fertilization outside of the prison. It's a kind of sumud. Celebration is a kind of sumud. At one of the ceasefires, when the prisoners were coming out and their families would celebrate, leaflets from Israeli drones were thrown down. And this is what the leaflets read: anyone participating in such events risks arrest. We have warned you, and we are watching you closely, reads one leaflet. So you can't even celebrate. Sumud also, of course, I have this picture of the Gazans who returned on foot to their homes in the north that were just rubble. This is sumud. They are deeply rooted in their land. You had Trump saying things like he wanted to clean out Gaza. He says it's a mess. It's a real mess. You're talking about 1.5 million people, and we just clean out the whole thing. The kind of annihilation that I began with. Of course, sumud is rootedness and the Palestinian olive tree. By the way, Israelis have uprooted more than 3 million trees since the year 2000. This is Salah Abu Ali's 5,000. The oldest olive tree in the world is in the village of Walaja near Beit Lahem. 5,000 years old. Look at the roots. Okay, sumud in theory and literature. Ghassan Kanafani says about the people of Gaza. He says there's also a psychological factor. Gaza is surrounded on the west by the sea, on the south by Sinai, on the east by the Naqab, and on the north by the Israeli state. The Palestinians there are psychologically besieged and accustomed to difficulty. In Gaza, they are tougher, says Kanafani. And in his short story, A Letter from Gaza, which he published in 1956, the narrator in that short story urges his friend in California to return to Gaza, to learn from the amputated legs of the children of Gaza. Imagine, this short story was published in the year 1956, and it's as if he is talking about the Gaza of today. Mahmoud Darwish's Silence for Gaza, which was published in the year 1973, Samt min ajl Gaza. He says, what is beautiful about Gaza is that our voices do not reach it. Nothing distracts it. Nothing takes its fist away from the enemy's face. Not the forms of the Palestinian state we will establish, whether on the eastern side of the moon or the western side of Mars, when it is explored. Gaza is devoted to rejection, hunger and rejection, thirst and rejection, displacement and rejection, torture and rejection, siege and rejection, death and rejection. He says, they also from Silence for Gaza, they might implant tanks on the insides of its children and women. They might throw it into the sea, sand or blood, but it will not repeat lies and say yes to invaders. It will continue to explode. It is neither death nor suicide. It is Gaza's way of declaring that it deserves to live. It will continue to explode. It is neither death nor suicide. It is Gaza's way of declaring that it deserves to live. Nizar Qabbani's poem, published in the year 1987, Talamidu Gaza, O students of Gaza. He says, O students of Gaza, pay no heed to our broadcast. Do not listen to us. Strike, Strike with all your strength. Decide your path and do not ask us. Bring your ropes and hang us. We are dead without graves. Do not return to our writings. Do not read us. We are your fathers. Do not resemble us. We are your idols. Do not worship us. We consume political narcotics and oppression. We build cemeteries and prisons. This is the revolution of notebooks and ink, so be melodies upon the lips. Oh, mad ones of Gaza, ya majaneen Gaza, 1,000 welcomes to the mad. If they are the ones who liberate us, the age of political reason has long since passed. So teach us madness. علمونا الجنون. By the way, so Yahya Sinwar was not the first one to say إحنا مجانين غزة. He took it from Nizar Qabbani. Again, I talk about Sumud and the continuity of past, present, and future. So Sumud must always be connected to a past, a history, a present, what is happening now, but also a hopeful future of liberation. Also, examples of Sumud are like archiving in the present. In Gaza, you have complete destruction and annihilation. Although we think of archiving al-Arshafe as something that belongs to the past, but in Gaza, because everything is being totally destroyed, this archiving must happen in the present against genocide, educide, scholasticide, culturicide. There's a very important website called Remembering Gaza Scholars. Please check out this website. I can give it to you later. RememberingGazaScholars.org. Archiving books in the present in Gaza. Dr. Haneen El-Masi has preserved and restored books and manuscripts that are more than 500 to 1,000 years old at Al-Umari Mosque Library in Gaza. The chemist, he's a friend of mine, Rami Murjan. He's teaching and rebuilding his chemistry lab in Gaza, which was totally destroyed. So he insists on bringing his students to the tents to teach them in tents on the grounds of the Islamic University of Gaza. So hope, you find hope in the face of unspeakable oppression. Asma Halabi, a scholar from the United States, says we must imagine in the face of genocide, we must imagine in the stead of those Palestinians who have struggled for years, the opposite of genocide. And with that, I end my presentation and I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Dr. Tahrir, for this. You indeed engaged in several points that invite scholarly engagement. Perhaps I was struck most by some of the few tensions that you touched upon. The idea of the archive struck me at most, indeed, because if art doesn't mobilize, but events do, as you mentioned in the interview, for example, what is precisely the function of literary archives? Like, is it simply preservation, consciousness raising, or another anticipatory rehearsal? And my question, this point struck me because I was thinking of what is the function indeed of the archive in the age of digital genocide? What I mean is, you are insisting on the imperative, in the book, you insisted on Sa'idian imperative that if you didn't write it down, it will disappear.
Disappear,
But
exactly.
in Gaza, for example, archives themselves are being destroyed.
Yes.
Libraries, universities, publishing houses, the physical infrastructure of cultural memory, that is. So what does archiving mean when the material conditions of preservation are being
Yeah, there's
systematically annihilated. Yes.
annihilated. Yeah, absolutely. There's a new book called Archiving Gaza in the Present. It's really, I think, an important book by Dina Matar and Venetia Porter. Now, the idea of archiving al-Arshafe, when we think of archiving, we think of something, in the past. But the problem is, Dr. Asma, is the destruction and annihilation in Gaza is so complete. If you do not archive now in the present, everything will disappear. It's as if these people never existed. It's as if their culture never existed. So, do you understand how important it is to archive it, to document it, to write it down? Because if you don't do that over generations, you have complete destruction of libraries, museums, art schools, educators, intellectuals, thinkers. If you don't archive it in the present, it will disappear. So, can you imagine how important the process and the act of archiving is now in places like Gaza? It is of the utmost importance. And there are people archiving, artwork, literary work, historical work, names of professors. It's happening. They're doing great work. This is resistance. This is sumud. This is a way of saying is that we are here and we will continue to be here and we have a future because they are literally being annihilated. So, what do? You have to do something. As you mentioned, Edward Said said, if you don't keep telling the story, it will simply drop and disappear. So, archiving, I believe, is probably one of the most important acts of resistance that is now happening on the ground in Gaza.
So basically, perhaps we can, in this sense, think of digital archiving as playing more important role than physical one, the traditional forms of archiving, because the archives themselves are being targeted and
Absolutely.
destroyed. So
That's
here
why
we
you
can
have that
think social
website.
media,
Absolutely.
mobile footage, whatever.
Right.
And
That's
could
why,
we?
Dr. Asma, you have that website that I told you about remembering the scholars of Gaza. You go into that website and you see who the doctors were. Of course, they've all been martyred, who they were, what they taught, what they did. They have their pictures and stories about them. So this is digitalized. This is a kind of archiving. And more of this needs to be done as well.
Would it be aligning with your arguments in the book that to think of this kind of digital archiving as a form of writing on the wall?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Why? Absolutely. Because writings on the wall, as you mentioned, that chapter, Dr. Asma, I talk about Najil Ali, who was actually drawing on the wall. He did literal drawing on the wall. But what kind of walls were they? They were refugee camp walls. That's when he started drawing. Who discovered him? Ghassan Kanafani. He saw these drawings and he said, "What is this?" Also, I mentioned my brother, Allah yarhamu, Professor Hamdi Khalil Hamdi, who was a biochemist and a scientist. He discovered a very potent anti-cancer drug. Had he been someone else, I think he would have been somebody now very well known, and everybody would be writing about him and writing about his discovery. But because he was never given the opportunity, so he was just like working on his own in makeshift laboratories. Even when he was in the United States of America, he was at a university that was Zionist controlled, right? And so they wanted to know what he was doing. They wanted to take his invention. He patented so that he can keep it in his name. But he was literally working in a makeshift laboratory. And even when he, came here and there, and he was, nothing for him was home or he didn't belong anywhere. So he could have been supported, like if he had been American in the United States, for example. But again, this kind of makeshift existence is a kind of like writings on the wall. His science are writings on the wall. Naji's writings on the wall. I mentioned also the Basil al-Araj. Basil al-Araj was an constructed, not in the sense of real construction, but constructed an underground university. And he gathered students and he taught them revolutionary thought. Nizar Banat did the same thing. So yeah, writings on the wall, I think, is one of the best chapters in my book. And of course, the conclusion is continuing the conversation where I interviewed people like Rifat Al-Arir, Layla Khalid, Stephen Salaita, Ibrahim Ode. Did I miss some important names? Anyway,
Khalid
Ilan
Al-Jarrar, yeah.
Pepe. I also interviewed Ilan Pepe. Ilan Pepe, of course, the popular historian, Terry Ginsberg. And all of them agreed on one thing, that the Zionist entity must be dismantled. And there must be, and there will be, inshallah, a Palestine from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea.
Yeah. So, with these provocations on the table, let's open the floor to everybody. And please identify yourselves before speaking, and let us just keep the contributions focused so that as many voices as possible can be heard here.
Go ahead,
Uh,
shoot, yalla, shoot.
yeah. So please just feel free to share your ideas, comments, and questions, perhaps.
Thank you for all the hearts that I'm seeing everywhere.
May I ask a question, please?
تفضل يا أيمن دكتور أيمن.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Hamdi. This was truly an amazing presentation and an eye-opening presentation as well. What I find especially powerful about this presentation is that Palestinian imagining is not only treated as nostalgia, but rather as, let's say, a practice of survival, a way of sustaining one's national identity throughout war, exile, diaspora, and attempted erasure often. My question is about the forward-facing side of imagination. We've seen so many instances in the world where a lot of internal struggle happens after the liberation. As a Palestinian, myself, when I imagine the day after liberation, I often find myself thinking about not only freedom, but also about difficult ethical and political and institutional questions that freedom will immediately bring to the surface. For example, political representation. What about, you talked about Edward Said's beginnings, but we already do have a beginning. We're going to have a second beginning after the liberation. What happens to the settlements? What happens to the people in diaspora? How is our political representation? How is our polity gonna look like? And I fear that these questions, if not imagined and discussed before liberation, they might reappear afterwards as, again, internal struggles or perhaps risks or whatever. So my question is, can Palestinian cultural imagination also become a futuristic imagination, a forward-facing imagination, one that helps anticipate these fault lines and imagine the ethical, institutional architecture of the liberated Palestine? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ayman. That is absolutely, you gave the definition of imagining Palestine, because in it, I discuss, especially in the introduction and then in the conclusion, I do discuss that we need to imagine and construct and reconstruct, configure and reconfigure who will be the citizen of the liberated Palestine. What kind of society will we have? what is our cultural identity? What national identity will we subscribe to? So this idea of imagining is it is futuristic, by the way. It is not only about struggling, but you struggle for a reason. You don't endure for the sake of endurance. You endure for a future hope and dream. So in the book, I do discuss what kind of Palestine will this be? Who will be allowed to return to Palestine? And I do ask this question. If you read the last chapter called Continuing the Conversation, I ask specifically this question of the intellectuals that I interviewed, Layla Khaled, Ilan Pape, Ibrahim Ode. Everybody agreed that it would be a democratic state, but who would have the right to return? Not just the Palestinians who were dispossessed of their land or thrown out of Palestine, but also their descendants, their children, and their children's children, everybody living in exile. This was basically what they said. And the idea of democracy was still there. What about the Jews? A lot of them said the Jews who are willing to remain in this kind of setup, they can remain. But those who do not want to live in this kind of setup will have to leave. So many discussions. So this is what's really, I think, what's interesting about the book is we do have these conversations. Imagining is futuristic. It is, as Doctora said at the beginning, it's an anticipatory endeavor in anticipation of things to come. It's constructing and reconstructing, imagining and reimagining. So the idea of a one nation, a democratic state, but it would have to be called Palestine, historic Palestine. We're not talking about a binational state. We're not talking about any kind of two states, because the Zionist entity is a genocidal entity which must be dismantled. And this is intellectually logical. All the intellectuals that I talked to agreed with this idea. But I do totally agree with you that imagining also has to do with constructing, and it's forward looking into the future, the day after, as you called it, Doctor. But it's an excellent idea, and thank you for asking this question.
Thank you very much. I also want to applaud you for not shying away from saying that it is from the river to the sea. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. I will always say that. Dr.
Thank you very
Ahmed
much.
Qabaha, and I think Dr. Ola have their hands up. Dr. Asma. We can't hear you. You're muted.
Okay, thank you so much. Should I ask my question right now?
Yes.
Is that Dr. Ahmed? Go ahead, Dr. Ahmed. Yes.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Tahrir. As always, you aced it. Such a brilliant presentation. I enjoyed it so much. I enjoyed the thoughts that you mentioned, and I agree with all of them. Especially, I am also a lover of Edward Said. I live in the orbit of Edward Said's thoughts. Also, I agree with your points about Kanafani and what you mentioned about decolonial violence. And by the way, I was at the University of Chicago last year, and there was a course taught by an Iranian colleague of mine, and the title of which was Decolonial Violence. And yeah, he was inspired.
That was a course with that name. Wow.
Yes, colonial violence, yes. And he was inspired by Frantz Fanon. He talked about Basil al-Araj, Kanafani, and all the writer, Rifat al-Arir, and all the writers you mentioned, even Sinwar, even Shawq al-Qurunful was taught by him. And it was
Majalin Ghaza was first mentioned, by the way, by Nizar Qabbani.
Yeah, this is actually the first time I learned that. Thank you for letting me know about this.
Listen to it. It's a wonderful poem. He reads it in Arabic. It's brilliant.
واو رائع جدا. Yes, I think يعني حتى يعني we think about Darwish. You mentioned Darwish in Silence for the Sake of Gaza.
نعم.
The last poem he wrote, 2006, he shares Sinwar's many thoughts. Like if we read الشوق القرنفل and we read Darwish is saying غزة تحاصر خاصرتها بالألغام تنفجر إلى آخره أجمل المدن. And so on. Also, I liked Dr. Asma's introduction. It's really brilliant, and saying art alone is not enough. There should be certain events, and this is actually something I noticed in the West, Dr. Tahrir, but not in the Arab world. I mean, like you find intellectuals really speaking the truth to power, showing solidarity, activism, advocacy, and demonstrating. In streets, like public talks and so on. So my question is that drawing on the work of Edward Said, you mentioned like his work about the intellectual, the representation of the intellectual and so on. So he emphasized the responsibility of the intellectuals to speaking truth to power and to challenge the dominant narratives. How do you assess the role of Arab intellectuals today in relation to Palestine? I mean, in light of the recent devastation in Gaza and ongoing settlement expansion, have Arab intellectuals lived up to this responsibility? And what forms of solidarity do you believe are most meaningful and effective at this historical moment?
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Ahmed, and thank you for the information you gave us about your experience at the University of Chicago. Have Arab intellectuals lived up to the moment? No, 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 not at all, Dr. Ahmed. And it's really very disappointing and depressing for me. Even, at different universities, you don't really find, I don't know what it is, the interest in the kind of conversation that we're having. And I know that, as you said, foreign intellectuals at European and American universities are willing to speak truth to power, as Edward Said says, because this is what is the definition of an intellect? What is an intellectual? An intellectual is not somebody who lives in the ivory tower. An intellectual lives on the margin, metaphorically, physically, on the margin with the oppressed, fighting with the oppressed, speaking truth to power, hegemonic power. And we know what is happening now, what happened in Gaza, what's happening in Lebanon right now, the destruction of the South, the total destruction of the South, the way they did in Gaza. In the West Bank, they're taking, I mean, what is the intellectual if not engaging with what is happening around them? And this is basically our region. These are our people. We are all the same here. I find that Western intellectuals maybe are not as inhibited as people here. Maybe they have more freedom. But at the same time, I want this kind of discourse, this kind of truth to come out of our lived experience. Because sometimes what happens is when you listen to Western intellectuals, okay, I do agree with some things they say, but they are not based on our experience, on our lived experience, our culture. So that's why I think Arab intellectuals need to do a lot more. I try to do as much as I can in my writings, in my publications. And I think it's silly, to be honest, when I see Arab PhD holders publishing papers about some random topic, some European writer or a British writer from the 18th century and the 19th century. It doesn't make any sense to me. As Darwish says, there is no aesthetic outside my freedom. Okay? No art, no publishing outside my freedom, meaning that what I write, my literature, my publishing, what I can do should be about what is happening on the ground, my reality, my people's reality. So Arab intellectuals, no way, are not doing not even the, marginally, what is marginally accepted of them. They must get into this kind of writing, publishing about what is happening. What do we need? I mean, more than genocide, more than annihilation, more than scholasticide, educide, all kinds of sides. I mean, what is happening in our region is devastating. It's not happening anywhere in this world. So, do we remain silent? Is silence the answer?
Dr. Tahrir, your talk now about publishing topics related to the crisis, the Palestinian question and the struggle, reminded me of the anecdote that you mentioned in the interview of teaching Kanafani instead of the story about the Holocaust. But my specific question here is double-faced. First, I noted down the question. Your insistence in the interview on integrating Palestinian literature into English department curricula in the Arab world raises for me some institutional question, and you raised some institutional questions related to the difficulty of introducing such courses to English departments. But I mean, what are the concrete obstacles to doing this? Is the resistance administrative, political, or intellectual? And for those of us who do teach really in these departments, how has your experience been?
Okay.
Particularly because someone in the chat raises the question, his name is Hassan, if it is, yeah, he raises the question, if you are discussing a question that concerns us as scholars, teachers, citizens, and as many of us joining us today, who have people with intimate stakes in the Palestinian questions, why are you conducting the conversation and debate in English? Someone raised this objection in the chat, and perhaps you can just integrate both parts of the question of integrating English literature into our English, Palestinian literature into English department curricula.
I do believe very much that our literature departments must be decolonized. In fact, I'm thinking of writing a new book titled Decolonizing Education in the Global South. Now, you mentioned about my institution before I became president. I was a professor of English, and we are given the curriculum from the Open University in Britain. So, one of the stories that I had to teach was a Holocaust story about the Jewish Holocaust. So when I came to that story, I said, let's not do this story. I'm going to give you Ghassan Kanafani return to Haifa. They said, but Doctora, what if on the final exam they give us the Holocaust story? I said, don't worry about it. So the idea, what I'm saying, Doctora Asma, is you have to take risks. Now, I didn't know what would happen. Would they be angry with me? Would I be fired? But I took the risk. Okay, so I taught Kanafani. When the final exam came from the headquarters, the first question was about the Holocaust story. So I wrote the Ghassan Kanafani question and I told them, answer it. And they looked at me like, our papers are going to be sent to headquarters. What's going to happen? I said, it's my problem, not yours. Answer it. So they did answer. Now, when we met and the external examiners came from Britain and they saw that Jordan had a different, question answer, they looked at me, but I was adamant. I was adamant. It's like, what we were talking about, speaking truth to power. I said, well, we have our own Holocaust. These are my students, and this is what is relevant for them, what has meaning for them. Dr. Asma, it's not easy. And it's not that you're going to be fighting people left, right, and center. Institutionally, it's not easy. Accreditation, local accreditation, it's not easy. I mean, why do we even have English literature departments? Why can't we rename it into literatures in English and teach Latin American, Arabic, Russian, Chinese, African literatures in English. Okay. So it doesn't, why are we teaching English identity? England is a colonizer. They devastated this area and they continue to do so. So why do we continue to emphasize their cultural identity? What's the point? Let's, use some logic. English literature departments in the Arab world are remnants of colonialism. This is what they left behind. This is a sort of colonization, a continuous colonization of the mind that we must decolonize. So you have to take the risk, is what I'm saying. Why not have this conversation in Arabic? That's a very good question. I wish my Arabic was as good as my English. That's my fault. I grew up in Chicago. I was educated in the schools of schools in Chicago. When my parents went to Chicago, I was only 6 years old, and I went through the whole school system into university. So when we came back, I never really went to Arabic schools. I was, I was pre-medicine at the University of Illinois in Chicago. So when we came back, my Arabic was never good enough in terms of writing and arguing, etc. So that's the only reason. But I do agree with you. We must decolonize in every way, shape, and form. Yes.
Okay. I see that Dr. Sami is raised his hand, but because I noticed that there was Dr. Ula. Is
Dr.
she
Ola,
still
are you
here?
there? Ola?
Dr. Ula? I noticed she raised her hand first.
Yeah,
She's not here
there?
anymore. Okay, perhaps we can move to Dr. Sami, please.
Okay. Dr. Sami, تفضل.
Assalamu alaikum. Is my voice clear?
Very clear,
Yes.
yes.
Thank you, Professor Tahrir, for your insightful presentation. But my question is that if imagination is the first, if it's the first, if it's the powerful means to preserve identity, memory, and hope, the question is, what's the next step? How can imagination be translated into real political context, or how can, in other words, how can imagine Palestine be translated into a lived Palestine?
Mhm.
Was the
Yes.
question clear, Dr.
Is
Tahrir?
my
Yes,
question
he's
clear,
asking about the
Professor
step
Tahrir?
after imagining Palestine. He's saying, what is the action then on the ground? Dr. Sami, it's
Is
precisely
my
that.
voice clear?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, it was a little bit slow because the connection maybe was not, very good. But I got your question. You're saying, what's the next step after imagining? What's the action,
Yeah,
etc. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, how
Well,
can such imagination be translated into actual political reality? This
right.
is the
So
point.
Reality.
basically, Dr.
When
Sami, you are
when can we see, imagine that?
so basically Dr. Sami is trying to say what is the relationship
Between
between imagining and
and action
realizing
and
Palestine.
realizing
Yeah.
actual.
Mhm.
Yes, Dr. Sami, that's a very good question. The idea, if you remember what Dr. Ayman asked before, he was asking about the day after. And I think, Dr. Sami, we can connect the two questions together because I mean, after liberation, let's say that the Zionist entity was dismantled, and then there was liberation and return. What happens? You have chaos. See, this is what the imagining process is about. It's about constructing ideas, concepts. That's what intellectuals do for the next phase. So before you have action, you need to have a very carefully constructed concept, idea, structure of what will happen. So imagining is a very important process that comes before the actual action. The two are connected. And it's not an easy process. It involves a lot of hard work, a lot of based on the reality that is happening on the ground. So imagining, you can think of it, Dr. Sami, as the step before the realization. Before you realize something, you need to be able to plan ahead. So imagining is not only about recollection, it's not only about memory and remembering. Imagining has this futuristic, anticipatory, idea to it. It is a planning for the action. Now, we as professors, as thinkers, as intellectuals, what do we do? What is our job? Our job is to educate the generations of students right now, because they will be the thinkers, they will be the doers, they will be the actors. So we need to educate them about what is necessary for liberation, what is necessary, unity, what kind of identity are we talking about, what is our culture, who do we accept in our circle, who do we not accept, etc. So our part as intellectuals is to educate, okay? Educate to liberate, if you want, because this is your job as an intellectual. You have to educate to liberate, to create a generation of thinkers who are thinking right, who are not easily led astray by the hegemonic discourse, let's say, of the West, the imperialist discourse of the West, which seeps into our media and into our homes even. So our part is to educate. And the action, believe me, will come when you have people who are clear about what needs to happen, what needs to be done.
So perhaps this is recycling the idea that I mentioned in the introduction, like the role of the fighter, the resistant fighter, is to stay close to Palestine physically, and the role of the intellectual is to keep Palestine close to our minds and hearts.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you for saying that.
I can see Dr.
Thank you, Professor
Mahmoud
Tahrir.
Abu
Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Dr. Sami. Thank
Mohammed
you.
Abu Jamus.
Yeah, Muhammad Abu
Hello,
Jamus.
everyone. Good evening.
Yeah, okay, تفضل.
Hello.
This is Dr. Mohammed Abu Jamus.
أهلين
تفضل.
دكتور.
First of all, thank you so much, Professor Tahrir, for this nice presentation. In fact, I have a comment and a question.
Sure.
The comment is that I believe the message that you try to send all along the presentation is related to the power of words. As if you were saying that we have to document, we have to mark the genocide, destruction, exile, struggle, suffering, sumud, as you called it, endurance, silence, displacement, and I'm quoting your words here.
Yes.
So basically, I do agree with you like 100% that we need to document so as to convey the message to the coming generations about all happened, because it's as if it's a camera through which we can see things happened in a different part in the world. So basically, this was a very important message. And I believe that literature has, this basic message of conveying themes and messages to people from different nations and cultures so as to be aware of. Now, something else I like is what you refer to when it comes to Nizar Qabbani's poem, Ya Tullab Gaza, Ya Talamid Gaza. And what is funny is that he asked people, by the way, it's now 33 years old. I believe that he asked people not to
document things to people coming, after us. I mean, he said, يا تلاميذ غزة لا تعودوا لكتاباتنا ولا تقرؤون نحن آباؤكم فلا تشبهون نحن أصنامكم, etc. So basically, metaphorically, he wanted people not to document things. But on the other hand, if we move to Mahmoud Darwish's بطاقة هوية, he wrote a masterpiece according to what I believe in. He said سجل أنا عربي ورقم بطاقتي 50,000 وأطفالي 8 وتاسعهم سيأتي بعد صيف فهل تغضب. سجل أنا عربي وأعمل مع رفاق الكدح في محجر وأطفالي 8, etc. So basically, what I'm trying to say here is that, yes, this is the power of word. This is the power of word before the power of what you call the destruction machine. This killing, blood-shedding destruction machine. Now, the question.
Okay.
All these marvelous ideas, Professor, you've just raised and lovely mentioned, take me as an educator to one simple question.
Okay.
What should we do? I mean, people in the realm or the field of education, when it comes to teaching literature, whether when it comes to schools or universities, should we reconsider the way literature is taught? Are we expected to preach students? Aren't we expected to come up with the students from one side to the other side to make students able to understand the actuality of what happened, and to be able to voice out, to spread the word, to raise awareness, and to make, if I can call them, the other part of the world understand how we feel here in the Middle East. Let me quote something you said. You said people suffer in silence. So should we convert the silence into shouting, quote unquote, through the use of words? And can we really move students, push students, encourage students to do so? I think this is a very legitimate question that should be considered and maybe answered. Thank you so much.
Thank
Dr.
you.
Tahrir,
Dr.
can we take another question from Dr. Dua Dajani?
Okay.
So
So
perhaps we can.
I'm going to keep Dr. Muhammad's question in
Oh,
mind.
okay, then answer Dr. Muhammad first. Yeah, it's okay.
Dr. Muhammad, I do agree with you, but I do want to emphasize I am very much for the idea of decolonizing our education, our whole education system, Doctor. Doctor, think about it. I don't know if do you know the writer Gauri Viswanathan? She was a student of Edward Said. She has a book called Masks of Conquest. And in it, she's Indian, but she's American, Indian from India. Masks of Conquest. You know what she says in the book? She says that the first department of English literature to be established in the world was in India. Imagine that, Doctor. In India, not in Britain, in India. Because they used English literature, as she argues in her book, as a mask of conquest, to conquer. They are conquering minds, Doctor. The idea of English literature is to have students study the literature, the culture, the identity of England. I remember when we were at university, Doctor, we had to study England 1, that was the course. That's what we called it. England 1, England 2, England 3, and England 4. And each one was like book, a book that big. That's in addition to Shakespeare, metaphysical poetry, etc., etc., etc. So the idea, what is the logic around, if we're going to take Gaudi Viswanathan's concept of masks of conquest, what's the point of teaching our people, our children, our next generation, English literature, culture, identity, and how great the Englishman is? Even in my university, one huge part of the course was about Englishness. The point is, if it's about language, because English is a global language, lingua franca, if it's about language and it's about literature, why don't we, as I said, have literatures in English? Now, is it about preaching? Doctor, it's not about preaching, it's about teaching. Okay? You teach your culture, you teach your history, you teach your language. If the idea is the English language, okay, teach literatures from all over the world, include Arab literatures as well, from all over the Arab world, not just Palestinian literature. So I do fiercely believe in decolonizing our education system. It's not something that one person can do. It's a collective process. About Nizar Qabbani's poem, when you were saying, for example, he says, do not read us. Because, Doctor, he is talking about people who have been colonized. They have been made, how do I call it? They've been made, they've been silenced. Their minds were constructed to fear. You know, they fear. They teach fear and silence. So this is what Nizar Qabbani is saying. He's saying the people of Gaza, because they live a harsh reality, they need to teach us what? Madness. علمونا الجنون. علمونا how to be mad like you. Mad meaning what? Breaking the rules that were placed upon us by the hegemonic, colonizer. Not just in the Arab world, all over the world, that all the parts of the world that were colonized, Doctor. English literature is not only a department in Jordanian universities, all over the Arab world. Iran, the same, okay? But the point is, what we need to think is literatures they teach history, they teach identity. So why are we focusing on one kind of literature is my question. And that's what we have to what? Dismantle. Dismantle it.
Yeah. So in my list, there are Dr. Ula and Dr. Dua Dajani. Are you there?
Dr. Asma,
Yeah.
I just want to say that we have about 10 to 15 more minutes left. So we're gonna have
Perhaps
to...
we can take these two questions
Great.
from Dr. Ula and Dr. Dua, and then I will be having
Dr.
some
Ula
closing
بتقول
remarks.
Dr. Ula is saying Dr. Muhammad has already asked the question.
Yes,
I have in
but
mind.
okay, but I have another question in mind. Thank you, Dr. Tahrir.
Go ahead.
Okay,
Yes,
if
please.
English literature historically functioned as a colonial instrument, as you said, how should we teach it today? Do you believe it can be reclaimed and transformed into a space for critical thinking and resistance? Or do its colonial foundations continue to shape the way it is taught and received? كيف نقدر إحنا ندرسه هلأ كدكاترة عرب? What do
Yeah.
you think?
A lot of English literature, Doctora Ola, a lot of the English novels have a colonial framework. So when you teach it, you need to be critical in that sense. You need to, as a professor of English, you need to give your students the historical context. You need to teach the cultural, historical, political context of the novel, of the English novel. All of them, all of the English novels that you are teaching were written with the colonial mindset in mind. Slavery, colonialism, it's always there. It's always there. If not in the foreground, it's there in the background. So you need to teach it critically. In the words of Edward Said, you need to interrogate the text. Interrogate the text. I'm not saying don't teach English literature at all. No, but teach it. When you teach it critically. Interrogate the text. When I, for example, taught William Butler Yeats, many of the poems, and Seamus Heaney, many of their poems are anti-colonial. So you can, I'm not saying just teach, Arabic literature or Arabic poetry, but you need to teach other people's literatures as well. English, Irish, Latin American, African. We learn from all the cultures, but always as a professor, as a teacher, you need to be critical. You need to interrogate. You need to give the context, historical, political, social, cultural. Okay? Because this is what the student is taking from you, and it will remain here. You need to form their thinking, work on how they think. You need to decolonize, in the words of Ngugi wa Thiong'o, you need to decolonize the mind.
Yeah. So
Yes,
one last
thank you.
question from Dr. Dua Dajani. Are you still there?
مرحبا.
Yeah, تفضلي.
Thank
مرحبا.
you for this fascinating presentation, Tahrir. I came across your work earlier, and the idea that imagining Palestine is not about return or exile, but about preserving identity through literature is amazing. And I am from Jerusalem, where we are not imagining Palestine from afar. We are not imagining not Jerusalem, not the West Bank, not Jaffa, not Akko, not anything. We are already living, studying, and working there every day. And no wonder what you talk about decolonizing, like living in Jerusalem. We know that education and memory are central to preserving identity, and no surprise that the schools, the colleges, and the cultural institutions here are spaces that are very important, and that is even understatement. They are battlefields. So my question is to know your opinion, like I'm curious to know your opinion about people who are in Jerusalem and elsewhere here in the country and navigate these realities on daily basis in order to study, work, and build careers and create opportunities for ourselves and our families. People usually make difficult choices and take certain risks. You already talked about risk taking for people who are outside Jerusalem and outside the country. How do you understand these choices? And how do you understand Sumud for them? And what do you think of engaging with Israeli institutions and opportunities that exist within the system? And what's your opinion about how people negotiate the tension between living safely and pursuing opportunities and at the same time preserving identity, memory, and collective belonging?
Wow. First of all respect to everyone living under occupation, Doctora Dua and Dr. Ahmed Qaba. Yani, I really have, tons of respect for you. You are
We have no choice. We are not living anywhere, and we have no choice. We'll continue to live here forever, and we
Yeah.
encourage our children to stay.
Right. You're living under occupation, and this just makes it doubly hard. I know that it's even more difficult for you, but I would say that what you're doing is sumud. Engaging with Israeli institutions, Doctora, for me, it's, sumud is a politics of refusal. That is a refusal to engage, Doctora, with Israeli institutions. I would never engage with a Zionist institution. I'm not talking about people of Jewish background. Ilan Pappé is Jewish, but Ilan Pappé is anti-Zionist, well known. He does
Yes,
not believe in the existence of Israel. But what you're doing in the inside, I think it is very important for us outside to listen to your voices inside. When I was reviewing or reading about the idea of endurance and sumud, when I first read the article by the people from Gaza and the West Bank, I just thought, oh no, I don't agree. Then I read it again and again and again.
Mm-hmm.
And I do believe what you're doing is amazing. You're kind of teaching under that kind of pressure. I know it's difficult. It's not for me to tell you to continue, but I'm sure that you will. Not once, but yesterday or 2 days ago, we were in a meeting with some people in Gaza. And of course, they have suffered terribly. You cannot even imagine the kind of suffering that these people went through. But I heard a comment by one of them that I really did not like. It bothered me very much. What
Mm-hmm.
this person said from Gaza, of course, what he
Yeah.
said was, I think الريزيستنس المقاومة أو اللي بيحكوا عن حالهم مقاومة يعلنوا الانهزام defeat وخلص مشان يخلصونا I just felt okay, I understand the difficulty, but at the same time I do not believe that surrender and defeat is the answer. It is never the answer because,
True.
as Palestinians living under siege and under occupation, what the Zionist state wants is to erase that population off, the face of the earth, to get rid of these people. So whether you are defeated and you want to surrender, they don't care. They want the land. They want to expand. So I do understand the difficulty, but I think the sumud, the resistance, the standing firm must continue, Doctora. Engaging with
No
Israeli
doubt. Yeah.
institutions, never. But I do commend you and people like you and people like Dr. Ahmed. You are doing amazing work. Dr. Ahmed publishes so much. He has so many articles. I read all his work. It's all about resistance. It's all about, everything that sumud. It's amazing. So I think what you're doing and under occupation, please continue, but don't engage with this very brutal,
Maybe the
genocidal.
the word engage is a little bit misleading.
Uh,
Sometimes you have no choice. You have to,
I understand.
like for example, one simple example, first degrees from national Palestinian universities are no longer acknowledged by the Israeli Ministry of Education. Meaning, if you live in Jerusalem, you can't work or apply to teach in a school in Jerusalem
I
or to
understand.
take any work on education unless
It's
you
something
are
forced
graduate.
upon you.
Yeah,
Right.
and that only shows the importance of all what you are talking about. Yes, they want to occupy the land, but first the minds of our
Absolutely.
children. That's why of the introduction of the Israeli curricula and so on. Thank you very much. And
Thank
really,
you.
it was very interesting. And please extend my regards to Dr. Jihad Hamdan. I miss his voice here.
Absolutely.
Thank
Salamat,
you.
salamat la Professor Jihad.
You're
Salamat
welcome.
يا
للدكتور.
دكتور.
And since we are running out of time, Dr. Ahmed is asking if he has just a few minutes to add a comment, one last comment. So please, Dr. Ahmed, you can add your comment before
شكرا
we
جزيلا
close.
شكرا جزيلا هي بس تعليق بسيط. I appreciate it and I appreciate all the questions and this is really a wonderful conversation and I hope Dr. Asma that you continue this work and we can collaborate together here in Palestine and you in Jordan. I think you are all Palestinian in affiliation, in your thoughts, in your public talks, in your research. And I have to say that resistance takes many shapes, one of which is what you are doing right now. And this means a lot to us. And I need to add, regarding the question about teaching literature, I think the most important point is how to teach it, and not only what to teach, but how to teach it. Like we teach it from a decolonial perspective, for example. We don't teach Shakespeare's Othello. He's racist in the way he thinks of Arabs. So we don't teach English literature the way it's taught in different ways. And like when we talk about colonialism, we talk about different ways. Like we're talking about neo-colonialism, imperialism. فإذا احتلوا هم الأرض ما يحتلوا عقلنا كمان، ما يحتلوا روايتنا. وانا يعني اي انفي الجامعات الاردنيه حقيقه، يعني انا بحسدها وبحسد الزملاء، وشكرا لكم انه في كثير يعني شغل على البوست كولونيال ستاديز والدي كولونيال ستاديز، وهذا الشيء اللي احنا بنستفيده منكم كمان في جامعاتنا الفلسطينيه حقيقه. فانا يعني I thank you so much on behalf of Palestinian academics. وبدي احكي لكم انه احنا يعني we follow your thoughts و your research و your talks، واحنا عن جد thankful لكم، ويعني نتامل انه we continue this work. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Dr.
Doctor.
Ahmed. All respect to you and to everyone in occupied Palestine.
Yes. So, thank you, colleagues, and thank you, Dr. Tahrir.
Thank you, Dr. Asma. Thank you.
I noted down some summaries of what we have been discussing throughout this seminar. I think what has emerged with particular force today is that the argument that imagining Palestine is not a compensatory exercise, it is a constitutive act. So it is an ongoing anticipatory practice through which Palestinian identity, resistance, and futurity are simultaneously produced. And here I can say that the prefix re that recurs throughout Dr. Tahrir's book, she talked about representing, reconstructing, reconfiguring, reimagining. This re indexes not repetition but renewal in my understanding of the book's core arguments. And here I would finally quote Dr. Tahrir quoted Murid Barghouthi in the interview that I conducted with her. She said, Barghouthi said, we live in an exile with an exile with an exile. Now, the recursive structure of Barghouthi's sentence enacts indeed the very condition that it describes, but the recursive structure of Dr. Tahrir's own project and book, in my reading, it works in an opposite direction because it regenerates not displacement, but a possibility and hope. And this is an idea that she has emphasized many times in this talk. So that is what Imagining Palestine offered me when I read the book. And it is not just a map of a vanished country called Palestine, but it is a practice of making that country present. So thank you all. And Dr. Tahrir, the last word is yours if you wish. تفضل.
Okay, Doctora, allow me please just to read the last paragraph of my book because for me it's very personal as well. Okay,
تفضل.
if you allow me, just let the book, it won't be long, don't worry. When I was writing this book, Doctora Asma, many people from my family and close to me died. And it pushed me forward in my writing. For me, writing became like therapy. I started writing because I wanted to write about my father and I wanted to write about my brother. And then not only my brother and my father died while I was writing this book, also the poet Murid Barghouthi, Azz al-Din al-Manasra, so many people that I love also died when I was writing this book. So the last paragraph is like, Doctora, a collective prayer, if you allow me to read it, please.
Yes, please.
During the writing of this book, many Palestinians in blood and in heart, so don't necessarily have to be Palestinian, in blood and heart, who are an integral part of the Palestinian narrative and revolution, which is still being written, passed from this life before fulfilling their dream of return. I name some of them here. To quote the Irish poet William Butler Yeats, to murmur name upon name as a mother names her child. My father, Khalil Ismail Hamdi, one of the founders of the Arab nationalist movement and the armed struggle for the liberation of Palestine. My brother, Hamdi Khalil Hamdi, the scientist who rooted his science in the very nature of Palestine. The two great Palestinian poets, Murid Barghouthi, who sang of Palestine's repeated historical pain, and Izz al-Din al-Manasra, whose only wish was, quoting, not to sleep in a grave in exile. The fearless professor and oppositional intellectual who spoke truth to power, Abd al-Sattar Qasim, and who wanted to take part in this conversation, he did, but he left us before he could. And Anis al-Naqash, the great Lebanese revolutionary, who was every bit a Palestinian, and who, when he knew of the imminence of his own death, wrote, "My life is done, but the Palestinian narrative has not ended." To all the martyrs of Palestine, we promise you to continue the struggle until there's a collective return to Palestine that would truly enable the Palestinian people to finally realize their genuine liberation. Tahrir. Thank you.
That brings us to the end of today's lecture. I'd like to thank Professor Tahrir for such a compelling and deeply insightful presentation. More power to you always, Professor Tahrir. I would also like to extend my sincere thanks to our moderator, Dr. Asma, for guiding this session so seamlessly and keeping our discussion so beautifully focused. Be on the lookout for our next session this summer, and have a very good night, everyone.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.